Web Marketing That Works podcast, episode 117, with today's guest, Pat Flynn.
Welcome to the Web Marketing That Works podcast. Come behind the scenes of real-life marketing experiments and listen in as amazing guests confess the truth about what really works. Now, here are your hosts, Adam Franklin and Toby Jenkins.
My name's Adam Franklin, and you are listening to the Web Marketing That Works podcast. Thank you for joining me today. This is the show for people like you and like me who love marketing on the web. Of course, we've got a special guest today who is Pat Flynn. I'll introduce him shortly. But on this show, we take you behind the scenes of real-life marketing experiments. We show you the good, the bad, and the ugly, and we reveal the truth about what really works. The podcast is brought to you by the book that Toby and I wrote, which is called Web Marketing That Works, and you can get that on Amazon, or you can get that on our website. You can also get a free gift from us, which is the 33 free marketing templates from the book. You can actually download those for free at bluewiremedia.com.au/book. Okay, so today's guest is none other than Pat Flynn. If you're a regular reader of our blog, you'll know that I interviewed him about a year ago at Social Media Marketing World in San Diego. And of course, he is the host of the Smart Passive Income podcast. And I was actually chatting to him then about how to get to 100 episodes and beyond. At the time, I think I was maybe 60 episodes into this show. And Pat actually told me that he's got a lot more traction and a lot more interest when he's actually interviewed people from within his own community, and he gets to shine the light on those people. Of course, he does get big name people on his show, but he said the key to the success and the longevity of his show has been exactly that, shining the light on the people inside his community. And so that has been what Toby and I have also done, and I was pleased to sort of report back to Pat. So look, on the show today, we are going to talk about Pat's new book. It's called Will It Fly? And it's all about creating, launching, and validating, actually not even in that order, validating, building, and launching an online program or an online product or course. And this is something that Toby and I have been working on ourselves over the last numbers of years. We've had products and courses and books, all of which we've done with varying degrees of success. We've actually made all the mistakes in the book, as you may know from listening to other episodes. But in this show, Pat lays out the framework and the process that you need to follow to be able to do that successfully. So that's enough from me. Let us head over to the show. My name's Adam Franklin, and I am very pleased to be joined by Pat Flynn. How's things, Pat?
Things are going well. I'm really, really happy to be here. Thanks, Adam.
Well, I'm very keen to talk with you about all this stuff today. I mean, you're very well known for your podcast, but today we're going to talk more about building a revenue stream from online, building online products and courses and all these different types of things. Now, I just want to backtrack a little bit because the way you got into this is quite unusual in my head, because you were working at the time and then you got let go. Is that right?
Yeah, it was in 2008. I had been working at an architectural firm for a number of years. That's what I went to school for, and I actually loved what I was doing. That's the interesting thing about the story that I think is different than a lot of other entrepreneurs is, a lot of other entrepreneurs, they remove themselves from a position because they're just not happy or they're looking for something more. And, I got kicked out and I didn't have a plan B. I never thought I'd be an entrepreneur in this way. I had envisioned having my own firm, my own architecture firm, in my 50s or 60s or so. But that was the plan. I was on that plan. I was doing everything I could to increase my status in the architecture space, but then I got laid off in 2008. Then I discovered this thing called online business, and it truly revolutionary to me. I had no exposure to it before until I got involved with some podcasts that I was listening to, and then some communities that were online that had people talking about it and sharing success stories about it. And that's really when my head went toward, well, maybe I can do this for myself, because I had done everything right before in terms of growing myself as an architect, and I got kicked out. And that's what didn't sit right to me. I did everything I was supposed to do, and yet I still got kicked out. And I needed to take control. And I wanted to live a life where I knew that if I failed, it was my own fault. And if I succeeded, it was because I put in the hard work, which I was always used to doing. And so that's when I wanted to become an entrepreneur. And to make a long story short, I then took some knowledge I had about an exam that I took in the architecture industry. And I had built a website around that. And it was essentially all my notes and everything I took into consideration when taking this exam, charts, tips, tricks, everything. And I turned that into a business. And I published a study guide in October of 2008, after I was officially let go. And it did extremely well. I sold it for $19.99. It was just an ebook. And this was kind of before ebooks were even a thing, really. And, that was the only way I could do it. And I sold it as a PDF file. And it generated nearly $8,000 in that month, which was 2.5 times my monthly income as an architect. So it really exposed myself to what was possible, and it changed my mind about internet business, because I had heard about internet business before, but all I would hear about it was just you can get rich quick and the scammy stuff and all the stuff that would put up red flags, and I just wanted to stay away from that world whenever I was trying to learn about it. But here I was kind of diving into it head first and realizing that there was actually a right way to do it, where I could actually provide something of value for people that was actually helpful to them. And this was the exam study guide stuff, and also get paid for it in return. And probably the coolest thing about all of it, and the thing I'm very proud of now, is the fact that, I get recognition for what I do online. And in this little exam space, I remember getting these incredible emails from people thanking me from the bottom of their hearts for helping them pass this exam, which would then help them further their career as architects. And, as an architect myself before, I would do all this hard work, but I would never get any, true recognition for it. And Adam, when you think about the buildings that we live in, the buildings we walk through every day, we don't even consider who built that building ever. And then here I was in this little architecture exam space getting praise and people calling me by name. It was pretty incredible.
And how did you feel like when you got let go and you realized that perhaps that architectural dream was no longer going to happen? What sort of emotions were you going through?
Oh gosh, every emotion that I could go through at that time I was going through. A little bit of depression, a little bit of anger. I was angry at my boss, but I know it wasn't his fault. And then, it kind of turned around into being angry at myself for not seeing this coming and not doing what I could to potentially be a better architect and not get let go. But of course, this was during the recession in the US. And of course, they were letting go a lot of people anyway. And they held on to me as long as possible. I also felt betrayed by just life and the path that I was told to be on. I felt a lack of confidence. I felt very, very, very upset, and sad, really. And it wasn't, if it wasn't for my family and my girlfriend at the time, who actually I had just proposed to, and she had just said yes right before I got let go. That was a good timing, and by good timing I mean the worst timing. But she was very supportive, and she believed in me. And when I decided to become an entrepreneur, she was very, very supportive and believed in me, and that was extremely helpful. I needed that because a lot of times during the process, as I became an entrepreneur, I doubted what I was doing. I had a lot of self-doubt and resistance along the way. I wanted to give up several times. And, what kept me moving forward was the support from others, but just the fact that I really had no other choice but to do the work required to make it work. And I was very thankful with the way things turned out, of course. And then from there, after doing well with the architecture exam stuff, which is still live today, you could see it at greenexamacademy.com. I sell study guides and practice exams and whatnot on that site. Also affiliated with some other programs and classes that I get a commission for through that particular site as well. But after all that happened, I started smartpassiveincome.com, which is where most people know me from. And this is my platform to share all this amazing stuff that have happened and share it in a very transparent, authentic way. The stuff that was missing when I was starting in online business, stuff I would have wanted to see, all the way down to, I even share how much money I make every month and where it comes from, because I want to show people that this stuff is real, it's out there. And also the fact that it's not easy, it's not get rich quick, but it is definitely possible. And I want to be there as that guide for people. And, I call myself the crash test dummy now, because now with a lot of the new opportunities to generate an income online, people are wondering, well, does this work? Does this not work? And, I say, well, let me see and figure it out. And so what I do, like any good crash test dummy does, they put themselves in the driver's seat and they just go right headfirst into that wall. But then I report back. I report about the data and whether or not that's safe or not.
And back in those early days, it sounds like you were very fortunate to have a supportive girlfriend at the time. But how about other people in your family and other friends? Were they supportive, or did they think you were a little bit crazy for going into this strange online business world? Like, what was the feedback like from those other people?
Yeah, my friends in the architecture space were like, dude, what are you doing? Like, you went to school for 5 years and you have 3 years experience in the workforce here. Like, why don't you just, wait it out a little bit? This recession will, we'll come back from it and you can get another job. And, my first reaction was to try and get back in, and I couldn't because nobody else was hiring. So that's when I was like, man, so upset about everything that I decided to become an entrepreneur. But my mom was always supportive of everything I did. She believed in me no matter what. My dad, same thing, but he had suggested that I go back to school and go get my master's degree in architecture. That way I could actually kill two birds with one stone in terms of, waiting out the recession, but getting something useful done and something I could use to potentially make up for that lost time when I get back into the space, which was, he was right. I could have totally done that. And it was a very smart option for me. But, again, I was just so, I felt so betrayed about everything that I had done already the way I was supposed to, that I felt like, I just knew that wasn't the right way to go. Other friends, a lot of them were like, oh, that's cool. And, they were just like, oh, well, we'll see what happens. And a lot of, I didn't really have anybody say, which I know some other people go through this, that when they're trying to start something on their own, you have people saying, well, you should get a real job. And the funny thing is I got comments like that after I had become successful online. And I don't know why that's the case. A lot of times people don't want to believe what I do or don't think it can actually happen, or they might try it out themselves and just see that it doesn't work for them. And it's because they either rushed into it or didn't validate their ideas or anything like that. And, they see somebody who is successful and they might just kind of take their feelings out on them or whatever. And I don't know, I'm here to help people. And I'm very lucky I had that support up front. But with my dad specifically, because he was the one who was really adamant with me going back to school. That was his suggestion, but he's always let me do things on my own to kind of learn on my own. And I'm very appreciative of that. And so when I came back and, showed that I was being successful online, he's become my number one fan now. He's on my blog reading comments. He tells me when he thinks a comment is a spam comment and to go ahead and delete it. Like, he gets really into all the tweets and stuff. And, every time I see him like every couple of weeks now here in San Diego. He's talking about stuff that I talk about online, and he's right there in the audience with everybody else. It's really cool to see him kind of fully support me in that way too. That's cool, because similarly, I'm a biochemist, and I was looking for work back in the early days in 2005. And I decided I didn't want to be in a lab coat doing research all day. And even though I had a job offer from a pharmaceutical company, I made this really strange decision to go into business for myself. And a lot of people thought, oh, you sure about this? This sounds like a bit risky. Anyway, I continued to do it and have had a lot of fun. And we've gradually evolved into the online products and courses and everything else. Yeah. But looking back at your story, selling $8,000 worth of a $19 study guide seems like it got some really good traction straight away, which must be a great feeling, because from what you talk about in your book, Will It Fly, it's not, you don't always get that traction up front. Did you somehow feel you were lucky on that first go, or was there a process that you followed on that very first attempt? Like, talk us through it. Yeah, I mean, what really happened was when I was in architecture and studying for this exam, it was such a hard exam. I was the guy who got 4.0, A pluses all the time in school. And when I took this exam, I got a 25% on it. And it scared me because that had never happened before. This was a really difficult exam. And actually, there were no resources online talking about it. And actually, to help myself study for it, I actually built a blog. And this blog I had used as my own utility. Never shared it with anybody. It was just online for me to be able to access when I traveled, because I had to memorize all this content within like a 400-page guide. And it was easier for me to just transfer that knowledge in my own way online for me to memorize it and create these cool little graphs and things that there were also things that were clickable in that reference guide that were mentioned, URLs. And I decided it would be easier to just place those on a website for myself to be able to click on and read further. And I shared it with a couple coworkers. But after I passed that exam, using that blog, I didn't have any more use for it. So it just sat there doing nothing, just collecting dust, I thought. And then when I decided to go into entrepreneurship, it was a podcast. Like I said earlier, it was a podcast that really got me started here. It was called Internet Business Mastery. And on that show, there was an episode with a guy named Cornelius Fitchner, who is teaching people how to pass the project management exam. And so when I heard that, I was like, oh, wow, I had an exam that I know a lot about. Maybe I can turn, this blog and my study notes into something I can just, figure out how to turn that into a business. And actually, when I turned on the comments and put an analytical tool on the site to see how much traffic I was hopefully going to get in the future, I realized that people were already coming to that site every single day in the thousands. It had been up for almost a year at that point. So it wasn't like I just started the site and then on day one started selling something. It had been collecting, Google keyword juice, I guess you could say, for lack of a better term, getting a lot of authority in the space because it was one of the only ones out there talking about it. And then actually I found out through, Google Analytics can tell you where you get a lot of people clicking to find your site. I found that a lot of people in forums were actually talking a lot about it. They kind of discovered the site on their own through Google searches and just started sharing it. And I didn't even know this was happening. I still, to this day, don't even know how long that was going on for. It's only until you put analytical tools on your site that you kind of have an understanding of what's going on. So when I eventually sold my guide, it was just over a year and a half after the site was created. So it didn't happen overnight. This is a part of the story that a lot of people, forget or they even, don't hear. And that's why I always make sure to tell it because, actually every successful business that I've had has taken over a year to get to a point where, it seems like it could take on a life of its own and fully monetize and support itself and add profit on top of that. So that's a really important part. And that's how it all happened. But do I feel lucky? I mean, yes, absolutely. I feel lucky that I got laid off and the timing was obviously perfect. But I also know that, we create our own luck. And luck is a lot of times that point at which opportunity is met and you take action on that opportunity. And I definitely, had those opportunities ahead of me and took action on those. And, a part of that is I didn't have anything else to fall back on. And I think that's why I did a lot of the things after I figured out that this was going to be my business. I did a lot of things that I never thought I would do. I stepped out of my comfort zone. I took big, bold risks in, calling other companies to partner with them, to writing an ebooks. I mean, something I never would have thought I would have done, but I felt like I had to and I had no other choice. And I guarantee you that if I didn't get laid off, I would not be where I'm at today. I would probably still be in architecture and working a lot more hours and being a lot more away from my children. And I'm very blessed, that layoff was definitely a blessing in disguise. It's all about those opportunities and then taking hold of them and moving forward with them.
I'll tell you what, if there was a guide to study organic chemistry back when I was at university, I would have definitely been paying $19 for that one. Okay, so you've spent over a year building up essentially the audience and then releasing that product, and it's went well for me right from the start. What are some examples where you've failed?
Well, there's a ton. Even in the exam space specifically for that particular exam, there was a lot of moments where I wanted to give up or I didn't feel like I was qualified. And there was a lot of projects that had started and had just never completed because I was scared. One of my biggest regrets was starting the process but not finishing that of creating an online course. So, of course, I sold this ebook and it did really well. I had actually paid a developer later to create a system on the blog platform I was using to post videos up and add worksheets and exercises, an online course to help people pass this exam. And I had started that process, but when I got to the point to actually record those videos, I got scared and I didn't do it. I never pulled the trigger on it. And I imagined just how much more, not just how much more money I could make, because, an online business or an online course is something you could charge a lot more for than an ebook. I could have made it loads more. But more than that, I realized how many people I potentially didn't help because of that. I know that if I had gone through with it, it would have been a much better resource than an ebook. It would be almost a way to better self-guide yourself or even have somebody to hold your hand through that process. And I was just too scared of putting myself on video at that point. So, I could even go into the back end of that website right now and see the unfinished lessons and all that stuff. It really makes me sad. And, I think about that now when I move forward with new projects about, who I would be disappointing if I didn't continue moving forward. I definitely thought about that when I was writing this book because, these big, bold things that we do, launching an online course, public speaking, writing a book, these are things where, they take a long time. And when things take a long time, your brain starts to play these games with you. Like you don't feel like you're qualified to do it or you begin thinking that people aren't going to like it or it's going to ruin you for whatever reason. Our brains do a great job of putting that in there, that self-doubt. And I think about what that particular mistake I made, that failure. So I had lost a lot of money in the development process as well because I didn't move forward with that. But in addition to that, I feel like a lot of people down, including myself. In another realm, after I started smartpassiveincome.com, I made all these great connections with a lot of entrepreneurs. And in 2010, I connected with a couple guys who were in the software space. They were building WordPress plugins. And so I was actually friends with them as they were building these WordPress plugins. There's just two separate guys doing two separate plugins. I don't even know if they really knew each other. I'm pretty sure they knew of each other, but they were doing totally different things in terms of, the solution that they were building, but they were both building WordPress plugins, and they launched within about a month from each other. And each of them were making over 6 figures in that very first month from their launches of their software. And of course, I was just like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. I've never done software before, but this looks awesome. The dollar signs coming out of my eyes, like, ching, like, this is a good opportunity for me. By this time, I had already built a significant audience on smartpassiveincome.com of thousands and thousands of readers. And I knew that if I had something great to sell, I'd be able to sell it and make money like these guys did. So my first thing I did was just come up with a quick idea for something I thought would be a good plugin, something that, I knew that would help me. And then I reached out and found a developer to develop it. I wrote an email to this person telling him what my idea was, what I wanted to do. And then he reached out back to me, and we had made a deal that he would finish this plugin within a month, and then I would go on to sell it. Well, a month went by, and it wasn't even half done. And the reason was because I was getting upset at him because he wasn't creating what I wanted him to create. But I know now that it was completely my fault. Why? Because I rushed into this thing. I didn't think about exactly what I wanted. I kind of had an idea of what I wanted, but if you're ever working with a developer, you need to give them exactly, page by page, button by button, click by click, exactly what you want them to do, or else it's going to leave it open for interpretation. And there were a lot of room for interpretation on what I wanted. And every time I got a version back, it just wasn't living up to what I had expected. And so it was my fault for rushing into it, not wireframing it, not giving him exactly what he wanted. And I knew I was frustrating him because of that. But then we got to a point where it was something that was, finally finished, and, it was decent. And, I installed it on a couple test websites to try it out, and it worked. And then I shared it with a couple people. I've shared it with a couple of my coworkers, not my coworkers, colleagues in the space I was in, other entrepreneurs who were using WordPress. And then I shared it with a couple people in my audience. And I quickly found out that these ideas that I thought were great actually weren't that great at all. They were like, oh, these would be great plugins, but I wouldn't pay for it. And, I was very upset at myself for, again, rushing into it. I kind of worked backwards. I built the thing and then tried to force people into it. And I never released that plugin. Actually, I tried to do 2 at the same time, which was another mistake. And I ended up losing $15,000 in the process. But it is definitely a lesson that I learned. So a very expensive lesson. But there were a lot of takeaways from that particular process, from the way I worked with the developer to rushing into things, and most importantly, just not validating that idea, trying to keep it a secret, because my whole idea was I wanted to keep it inside and not share it with anybody, because A, I didn't want anybody to steal that idea, and B, I wanted it to be this big grand reveal on the day that it came out and just blow everybody's mind. And thirdly, I made the mistake of chasing the money. And every time I've done that in the past, every time I think about the different kinds of businesses I've tried to build, because I've tried to build several now since starting that exam site. And many of them are successful, and a lot of them are complete failures. And the common denominator from the failures is often the fact that I was chasing the money first, as opposed to serving my audience first. Which, if you go back to the architecture site, it's obvious that I was serving my audience first, because it wasn't even built to become a business. It was built to just help myself pass this test with all the information that was needed. And with smartpassiveincome.com, I never even made a dime from smartpassiveincome.com until over a year, when I started to get involved with affiliate marketing. It was all just complete, pure, free content that was helping people. And because it was serving people in that way, and it was different than everybody else out there, I started to gain traction and build authority in the space. And then now people want to find my affiliate links to pay me back for that information, which is really cool. So those are the big lessons I learned. And yeah, those plugins never seen the light of day. And now I've sort of learned from those lessons. And that's where this book, Will It Fly, comes from. And a lot of personal anecdotes are in this book in terms of what I learned over time and things that I am doing now that are working. I have software now that I recently created, and I definitely had taken a slower, more methodical approach. Started to talk about it even before it was built with other people. Had a beta group, a limited number of customers to work through with a minimum viable product, so that we can make sure it is what they want before I actually do what's called feature creep in the software world, where you just put every feature that you think should be in there, and then people don't even use half of them. So I've learned a lot of lessons along the way, and I've tried to put them all into this book, Will It Fly? And so, yeah, I failed a lot of times. I mean, we could go for hours about that, but you got to go through those failures sometimes, or all the time. Every entrepreneur has failed. If you go to an entrepreneur and you ask them if they've never failed, and if they tell you they've never failed, they're lying, because that's a part of the process of entrepreneurship, is failing.
It sure is, and it's a necessary step, I guess, to getting to some of those victories. I mean, I've built products in completely the wrong way. As you've said, we've had the idea and we've built it and spent lots of time and lots of money building the thing, and just to find out that no one actually wants to buy it in the first place. And I'm so pleased that you've put all of your learnings together in the book, Will It Fly? So, I mean, we hear we've spoken about all these different things like having an idea, having an audience, validating a product, finding out if people actually want to buy it. Will they actually spend money on it? When do we build it? When do we launch it? How much do we sell it for? Do we get into affiliate marketing and get other people to help us sell it? What sort of order would you suggest that we take for each of these different steps?
Yeah, well, of course, it's again outlined in the book. And the funny thing is, the reason I wrote this book is because I have a few podcasts, and one of my podcasts is called Ask Pat, and this is a show where 5 days a week I answer a voicemail question from an audience member, and I get voicemail questions every single day, dozens actually, and it's really cool because as a byproduct of having content for the show, I get to hear from my audience exactly what they need help with, and by far the number one question I get is, how do I know if this thing I'm thinking about doing, or if the business I'm working on right now, how do I know if this is going to work? People don't have a lot of time, extra time beyond what we are already doing. So of course, they want to spend that time where they know it's going to work out. And so this, it stops a lot of people from starting, or even for those who have businesses, it stops them from taking those next steps. Last year, that confirmed that this was absolutely the number one problem that people had. And the fear was just, how do I know if this thing's going to work or not? And so that's why I wrote this book. And then in terms of the steps, it's a very methodical process. It's iterative, it's step by step. And it's a point where you go through one step and then you can figure out what worked and what didn't, so that you can get it to a point where it does work, and then you can move on. And you don't move on until it does work. And this is as opposed to what kind of like what you were saying earlier, Adam, and what most people traditionally did when starting a business is you build the thing. You kind of guess what your audience wants or what a market wants, and you build it, and then you run to your rooftop and you shout like, buy my thing, like it's awesome. And then nobody buys it. And then you're left there wondering why. And you don't know why. Is it because of the way you shouted from the rooftop? Is it the product itself? Is it, who you're shouting to? Like there's a lot of questions. So this process, this step-by-step process will take you through and make sure that you validate properly along the way. But there's a lot of steps involved, and, it is, sort of like drinking from a fire hose, but because it's iterative, you can stop and take breaks along the way. So the way it essentially works is once you have an idea, the first thing I have people do is really define what that idea is. And there's a number of different ways to do that. Through a mind mapping exercise, which allows you to visually organize what that thing is in your brain to help you not do what I did and just kind of write an email about it and send it off to a developer, but really understand what it's all about and what all the components are, so that you can then be able to share it with people much easier, because that's actually the next step, is sharing it. You want to share it with as many people as possible, even complete strangers, because you need other people's opinions. You have to, not just your target audience too, but you want to gauge people's reactions to it. You want to allow people to poke holes in it where there needs to be holes poked into. And you also want to engage with other people to have them, make it even better and actually think of things that you haven't even thought of yet. And so that's really important too. But there's also a lot of market research that's important too. This is where a lot of people skip over, because research is scary, right? Research on the surface is kind of boring, but it's very necessary. So I've tried to outline research in a way that's fun and easy to understand. And here's the two different things that you can come up with that will help you understand what your market is like, what your customer is like, to make sure that that idea fits a problem that they have. So it works like this. First thing that you want to create is an understanding of what this market is like, because there's a market out there you're trying to serve, obviously, with this idea. And if you want to stand out from the crowd, you need to know what that crowd is. We always hear that phrase, stand out of the crowd, but then you have to first know what that crowd is like in order to stand out, or else you're either going to be, just lost in it or never start at all. So to stand out of the crowd, you need to know that crowd is. And so this market research, to get a bird's eye perspective of what's going on, you find the 3 Ps of your audience. This will help you create what I like to call your market map. So the 3 Ps are the places where your audience lives, online, offline, where they congregate, whatnot. The second P are the people, the influencers in that space who already have earned trust and authority with that particular audience. And then the last P are the products, the things that they're buying, how much they're paying, what's being served to them right now. And just this small little simple exercise alone, if you outline these things, you're going to have an amazing tool that you can use moving forward, because you have, for example, all the places where you could potentially advertise, that you could guest post on, and all those things, all the people that you could build relationships with, JV partnership with, joint venture partnership with, reach out to and build a relationship on social media, and then all the products that you could potentially serve to your audience as an affiliate, or see who your competition is and gauge what your price is versus theirs and whatnot. it gives you an amazing tool that you could use for that, but also from an upper perspective, because a lot of people who get into businesses and who start things worry. They worry because people are already there. Now, it's a good thing if people are already there because it validates that market, but it also is good because as coming in late into the game, you get to see what's out there already. And through this market map that you create, you will actually get a better understanding of what that market is like and the position that you could take in it. You'll know more about it than the people who are in there actually, which is really cool. So you can find the holes, you could find the gaps, you could see what's working in the whole space and incorporate that into what you're doing and see what's not working and make sure you don't do that. And you can come in and become, a top player in that space. So that's your market. And that exercise alone is worth gold to you. So even if you have a business already, hopefully you know and have a list of those things that are available to you. The second thing is then getting into your customer's head. And, a lot of times you hear about this thing called the customer avatar, which is, it's important. And this is essentially an exercise for any business to understand who they're speaking to and to remember who their audience is. And oftentimes when you run through this customer avatar exercise, you come up with a person's name, they have an age and a family, and they do this. And here are their likes, here are their dislikes, here are their problems. And it's important to know that. But every time, I don't know about you, Adam, but every time I try to do this avatar exercise for myself, I find it very challenging. And then, when I have this person in my head who I'm speaking to, and, you're taught to think about this person when you write an article or when you're on stage and you're coming up with a presentation, imagine them there watching you. Or, when you're doing a podcast, they're in that room listening to you talk. It's good in theory, but every time I've tried to practice that, I can't help but know that person's just made up and it's kind of fake. And so I don't have a connection. I don't have an emotional connection and true feelings to who this person is. And it's very difficult to really get into that person's head because I can't reach out to them and talk to them. So I prefer to actually reach out and talk to real people in your target audience and discover a few things about them. The first one is you want to learn through these conversations. And there's actually ways that you can discover this stuff online too without having conversations, because I know these conversations scare a lot of people. But by far, the number one secret weapon I have in my business is one-to-one conversations with people in my audience. I don't know if you knew this, Adam. I talked about it a few times on my podcast, but I make it a priority to speak to people in my audience one-to-one, just random people who come across my audience who are subscribed to my email list. I reach out to them, and once a week I talk to one person for at least a half hour. And I learned so much about who this person is, what their problems are, the way that they speak, stories about their lives. And I can really get emotionally involved with, what they're going through so I could better serve them. And I also get an understanding of, what's going on with the website, what could be improved, and, what did you like about this episode and what did you not like about this episode? And yes, I'm only speaking to one person, but I get to hear it from my own audience's voice from a real person. And it's so, so strong. So, if you have a business already, or even if you don't, try to make it a priority to have these conversations with people. Now, the things that you're supposed to discover are your plan, PLAN. I like acronyms. This is the second thing. The first P in the plan is the problems. By far, that's the most important thing you want to discover. You can ask questions like, what's something that, you wish you could change today about? What's something that repetitive that you do that whenever you do it, you just wish you had some way to do it even better or faster? What's an inconvenience that you have? What's causing you ache? What's a pain that you have related to this? The answers to that question will tell you exactly what businesses you should create. And a lot of times they align with that original idea you had. And a lot of times actually they don't. And this is where during the process, you actually discover that, a business is not about what you think. It's about what your audience is going through. And it's a big realization for people. A lot of people at this point in the process throw away their original idea, or they change it or adapt it to meet the problems that their target audience has. And this is really important to do now as opposed to figuring this out 2 years down the road after you have a product and it's not selling and you're just trying to force it down people's throat. If you do this right, the marketing becomes a lot easier because it's exactly what they need. So figuring out the problems is the first thing. The L in the plan is the language that they use. And this is really important because you could have the best solution for a particular problem in the world, but if you don't share it in a way that connects with that particular audience, they're not going to really believe that you have the solution or quite understand them and what they're going through. It's really important to talk the way your audience knows to respond to or how they like to listen. And there's a quote by Jay Abraham I have in the book. It's one of my favorite quotes. I've used it in presentations before. And that is, if you can define the problem better than your target customer, they will automatically assume that you have the solution. So that language is really important. And you literally should write down the phrases and the words that you could use then on sales copy and emails and conversations to really get them to say yes to things that you have to offer to them. The A are the anecdotes or the stories that they have. So in these one-on-one conversations, one of the best questions that you can ask is, or starts with, tell me about a time when blank, or tell me a story about when you blank. that opens up Pandora's box for people to tell them and spill out their emotions and really get to the root of what these problems are. And that's where all the solutions, the good solutions come from in a business are from the root. And then through that, the PLA, the problems, the language, and the anecdotes, then that's when you kind of try and figure out what that real need is. And that becomes what you then test. And through the testing process, just to break it down really fast, because I know, I could talk for hours about this again. This is what's been my one thing for the last year or so. So it's top of mind right now, and I can go on forever. But the validation process is this. You take this need, which is essentially a hypothesis you have, an educated guess based on the research that you've done to see if people actually pay for it. Because validation is not people saying, yeah, I like that, or yeah, I would buy that. It's them taking action and actually pre-ordering it, or in some way doing some transaction that shows you that, yes, they're voting not with just their words, because people will tell you what you want to hear sometimes. But when you're looking to have something where you're building a business, you need people to pay you to show that, yes, this is something that you should then spend time building. And you're being honest with people, when you're having these conversations and presenting your idea to people and what your solution is. You're being honest, you're taking pre-orders, it's not available yet. But there's also a great opportunity for people to get involved early, to build it like I did with my beta group with my software, to have them be able to influence what it becomes. And, if you get a certain amount of people to say yes and vote with the pre-orders or some sort of transaction instead of their words, well, then you know now that you can then build this thing. And now you are not just guessing. And now you have this group of people who you could work with to turn it into something that after this small scale experiment is done, then you can go large scale and it'll work. So essentially, you get in front of an audience, whether you have one built already, which most people don't, and then you get in front of somebody else's audience. I've revealed 8 different ways that you could do that in the book. And then you actually have conversations with these people. You present what your solution is. You could do that in a number of different ways. One-to-one, again, is the best way to do it, but you could also do it on things like webinars. And then you actually collect that transaction. I share the different software you could use to collect pre-orders and whatnot. And again, that's how you know, as opposed to just guessing. If you just build a business based off of guessing, you have to know that sometimes we guess wrong, but you could take these steps ahead of time to give yourself a better chance of succeeding down the road.
That is super valuable, Pat. And I recommend all listeners get their hands on Will It Fly, which comes out on February the 1st, 2016. But Pat, one final question before we go into our sort of closing comments. The big question I always hear is, what if I tell someone my idea and they steal it?
Yeah, there's actually a whole section in the book about that. And that was a question that I had for a guy named John Saddington, who was a guest on my show, who has sold multiple businesses, each for over $1 million each, across all different niches. So this is an idea guy. He gets a lot of ideas, he executes and does really well with them. So I actually asked him, well, what's the first thing you do when you get an idea? Like, what do you do? I want to know your process. And the first thing he said was, well, I talk about it with as many people as possible. And that was surprising to me back in the day when I asked him this question, because this was an episode from a long time ago. And of course, my question was that exact same question. Well, why would you do that? Like, people might steal your idea. And then he turned around and he said, no, they won't. So we had this little argument, but he convinced me that, you know what, if you're the one that is here, that is focused on building this business, you are going to be the one to take action on it. People talk all the time, but they never take action. And you are the one who are way ahead of them because you're doing the research. And it's not anything you have to worry about. This doesn't happen. And so that's, of course, and then you would want to, yes, you could do like NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, but that just makes it seem unreal. So, I go into depth about that because it is a topic and definitely the number one concern people have when they talk about their ideas. But I feel like there's more risk involved with not talking about the ideas, by not allowing people to poke holes in it, by building something that may not work out. That's a bigger risk, I feel, than somebody stealing your idea.
I agree. And I tend to find that people that are worried about people stealing their idea, it's very often their first time going into a business venture. Whereas if you have done it before and you realize the value of sharing, then it's all of a sudden, well, of course I'm going to share it. But it's that initial fear of people, going about it the first time that just think, man, if I share this with the world, what's to stop somebody else just taking it and running with it? They've got more resources, they've got more experience. I'm like you, I do encourage them just to share it and get that feedback. And you're going to be the person that has the passion and the drive to actually see it through. And if people do love the idea, then chances are they're going to be much more likely to want to partner with you or help you promote it or all these other things, as opposed to just steal it from you and try and make it work. And at the end of the day, once it launches anyway, it's out there for the public to see. So, they could steal it then if they really wanted to, but it doesn't often happen that way. So Thanks for addressing that issue.
Yeah, and plus, you're going to, I talk about this in the book too, you're going to put you into your business, and nobody is like you. And so, you have you and your own experiences and your knowledge and the research that you do to your advantage. That's something nobody else could have. So that's something I always encourage people to do is to put more of themselves in their business too, because we are all 100% original from each other. And a lot of us try to be like other people, but we should be more like ourselves.
Absolutely. So Pat, tell us where we can find out more about Will It Fly.
Thank you. If you go to willitflybook.com, you can check it out there. That's really the URL that you need to know, willitflybook.com.
Awesome, Pat. Well, thank you so much for sharing your valuable insights on today's show, and congratulations with everything you've done with smartpassiveincome.com and all the other businesses and podcasts that you run. It's been an absolute pleasure talking with you, and have yourself a great evening.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
And that's a wrap for my chat with Pat Flynn. Of course, his book is out February 1st, 2016. So depending on when you're listening to this, head over to willitflybook.com and get your hands on a copy or pre-order a copy. There's a lot I liked about that interview, particularly Pat's backstory of being an architect and then being let go, and then I guess kind of having no other option but to dive headfirst into this online business world. And it's so exciting to see that it's actually become way more lucrative and way more fun for him than what he believes would have been the case had he stayed as an architect. And I think that's becoming more and more common, especially with online business owners. Many have fallen into it, I guess, because they've either been made redundant or chosen to jump out of their corporate job or their job where they've been traditionally trained. I think it does actually highlight the opportunity that we've all got, regardless of what we've been trained in or what we've done as a job up until now. I mean, in the last 10 years, the tools have just become so easy to use, and the barriers to entry are virtually zero. I think the biggest challenge these days is probably information overload and actually deciding what to commit to and then saying no to everything else. Some of the things that Pat said that resonated with me was that whole idea of testing things out with your audience. And I mean, that's definitely one of the things that Toby and I did wrong with some of our other programs and courses a few years back. We built it, then we tried to sell it, then we realized it wasn't selling that well. Whereas these days, having learnt that lesson and from having studied people like Pat and numerous other mentors, it's a whole matter of testing an idea out, seeing if people will buy it, building it collaboratively with them, and then launching it when you've got a lot more confidence that the product is going to sell in the first place. One final thing that I thought was really cool that Pat did was actually calling up at least one person off his email subscriber list every week and having a 30-minute conversation with them to really understand, well, firstly to say thank you, but secondly to really understand what makes them tick, what challenges they're facing, and then asking them those questions and listening to the language that they use, and then using that language when you write the sales copy and when you write the content around the product or the course that you're creating. So plenty of great advice there from Pat Flynn. I hope you found the show informative and actionable, and I'm always open to your feedback. You can always email me, adam.franklin@bluewiremedia.com.au. You can tweet me at Franklin_Adam. And if you enjoyed today's episode, and I really hope you did, I would love it if you could just take a couple of minutes now to duck over to iTunes or Stitcher or SoundCloud and leave us a short review and a rating. It really does help increase our visibility and attract good quality guests like Pat Flynn onto the show. Don't forget one final thing. If you haven't downloaded our 33 free marketing templates from our book, please just head over to bluewiremedia.com.au/book. Thanks for listening through to the end. My name's Adam Franklin, and I'll see you next time.